Everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar series brought to you by the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium. I'm going to hand it over to Stevie Ghiassi from Legaler.
Thank you for having me, Kim, and thank you for the kind introduction. And today we'd just like to talk a little bit about the blockchain infrastructure for the future of legal services, but just a little brief, a few words about myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Legaler. We're based in Sydney, Australia, so it's morning our time, so hello everyone. And you can contact me at the below details at Ghiassi on Twitter and Legaler HQ. And also there's my personal email in case you need to get in touch. I'll put that up again at the end. And we started Legaler with the belief that one day a technology company would become the largest provider of legal services. So we started with a communication tool that's now in use in over 80 countries, helping to connect lawyers and clients within their browser securely, helps you schedule, host, and archive a meeting in one place. And now we're expanding that vision as we see blockchain opportunity to kind of better connect lawyers and clients. So I quite often get asked, what is blockchain? But I think for the purpose of today's webinar series, I really want to focus on why blockchain. So if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, we're on the tail end of the peak of inflated expectations, and we're moving into the trough of disillusionment. So I think the why becomes more important than ever. Why was there so much hype around blockchain, and why is it so important going forward? And today there's a few little topics I want to cover. So the evolution of trust technologies and a brief history of ledgers. I think these two will help, again, put into context the why. And then we can talk about the impact of blockchain on the legal industry and how it's going to change the way lawyers work, and what Legaler is building, the blockchain infrastructure for the future of legal services, and how that lends itself to access to justice. So looking at the evolution of trust technologies, let's just quickly define what trust is. So Oxford says it's a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. For today's purposes, I kind of made up my own little version because I think it just helps frame the why a little bit better and why trust is so important. So something that helps us cope with uncertainty. I think that's why we really turn to trust and why trust has become such an important concept. Going back to the very start of things, kinship is really the first type of distributed trust. Basically, kinship is a foundational trust technology that lays the groundwork for social cohesion, a process by which people teach their children how to be adults and give them a sense for the nature and boundaries of their community. That description is by Natalie Slomensky, and basically, I think it frames really nicely some of the things that we take for granted. So one of the first trust technologies would have been around reproduction, and then how society has then formed around that. So you think about mateship, how we structure marriages. All these things really go a long way towards how we've evolved as a society and how society is scaled. And again, some of the other things that we take for granted, family, hierarchy, religion, these are all different types of trust technologies that have allowed humans, as abstract thought has evolved, to kind of gather around and really become the superior race on the planet or species. And currency, writing, family, oops, I got family twice there, but these are really the types of trust technologies that have been inherently ingrained in how society has evolved. Looking again at the first protocol, we used language as one of the really first sets of rules or frameworks we use to actually trust each other. And this is how we, moving into abstract thought, helped society scale. As over time, nature has, trust has really evolved. When we started with individual trust, we were in our tribes and we had one-on-one relationships. We could see and touch and feel the person next to us. We could actually have a business relationship where it was maybe, selling one woolly mammoth husk for, a fur jacket. That was quite easy to do. But as society scaled, we started relying on third parties. So then institutions, around especially the 18th century became quite powerful and started becoming the intermediaries in all of our relationships. Now we're moving into the era of distributed trust. And again, we'll touch on why this is so important a bit later, but blockchain is really playing a big, important part of that. We're moving away from individuals and becoming distributed communities. And in doing so, we're actually setting up new types of trust organizations. So as we move into the decentralized age, boundaries are falling away, centralized entities are falling away, people's trust in governments, religious movements, entities are actually falling away, and they're now starting to put trust in a distributed sense. So we're now starting to see organizations that are also distributed. Basically, companies are just a series of contracts. As Naval, the founder of AngelList, puts it, a firm is just a nexus of contracts. So we think about it, when we have a company, we have a series of contracts with our employees, with our customers, with the law. These are all changing and shifting in terms of our views, and they're heading into a decentralized and distributed manner. And so again, to see why this is all so important, I think we need to go back in time and actually study the history of ledgers to see why blockchain, this type of new ledger, is so important now. And going back all the way to Mesopotamia, this is a clay tablet that basically dates back almost 5,000 years. And the fascinating part is that there's so much actual technology built into this early type of ledger. So this is probably one of the first ledgers that's ever been discovered. And it was likely used to actually create a contract between someone for production of beer. So you had malt and barley, and you got rows and columns. And so it's very clear that the ancients created Excel spreadsheets before they moved to Word. So this predates language in a written form, and it's in Proto-Cuneiform, one of the first written languages. And what you'll notice is there's pictograms that actually depict the item. There's the cylindrical holes to depict the value. There's a time and date system. So from the earliest societies, this is actually how we scaled trust. We actually baked it into clay. And this is around the time that the first societies in Sumer actually first moved towards around the 50,000 population mark. So these were really, as we moved out of kinship, out of tribes and peer-to-peer relationships, this is the first type of technology that really helped us scale our trust. As things evolved, things became more commercial. Around the 11th century, Jewish merchants really brought a new type of technology in the evolution of ledgers to Europe. And this was in the form of double entry bookkeeping. And again, when the ledger changed, a lot of society and a lot of things around it changed as well. So a lot of people attribute capitalism to the birth of the double entry bookkeeping method, where you had asset minus liabilities giving capital. And so for every entry, you had an opposite entry that basically had asset and liability. So people really started thinking about profit and loss for the first time, and really in a commercial sense about business. So this helped really scale our commercial pursuits. A lot of people call cryptocurrencies the magical internet money, but the ledger that the central banking system has used is quite magical in the sense that a lot of people have lost faith in the way it operates. But essentially, banking used to be backed by gold reserves, and once we moved away from that, I think the Bank of England moved away from that in the 1930s, and then the US in the 1970s. So we now have a new type of ledger that helped us keep track of finances, and we have banks that created fractional reserve lending, quantitative easing, and all these different things that really fiat money came along and helped us with, but have now lost the people's faith. And just the very idea of money, if we go back into the very first examples of it, we have one of the first distributed decentralized ledgers. And so this is a rhinestone dating back to about 1500 years ago, around 500 BC, on the island of Palau in Micronesia. And it has various names, rhinestone or faystone, but essentially this was really the currency. And they were so fascinated by creating this type of currency, they went thousands of miles away. And this was, again, the inhabitants of the island of Yap. They went to Palau and brought back these limestones and carved out this currency. The only problem was these stones weighed up to about 4 metric tons. And so this is a gentleman probably going to buy his morning coffee, not the most practical way to kind of get around. So basically, they had to come up with a practical means of actually exchanging this type of currency. So what they did was, instead of actually moving the stones, they actually just transferred ownership, and they memorialized and socialized who owned which stone across the entire island. So what this did was it distributed trust, because everybody on the island knew who owned what, and no one could actually steal the money. So if someone sold their house, they essentially just transferred ownership of that. So they essentially just transferred ownership of that stone. And so what this meant was that for the first time, they were creating trust by consensus. So if everyone on the island knew someone owned that stone, then nobody could go and then steal that. And so that was quite important, because in 2008, with the release of Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, this was the exact same thing. It was a distributed way of having trust and coming to a consensus about the truth. But this time it was done through a decentralized network of computers. And so what the key problem this solved was really the one of double spending. So the entire new innovation behind this technology was that you were no longer able to spend digital money twice. Now, what that did was it gave us digital scarcity for the first time, and now we could inject that into any system, organization, or process. So when the ledger changed, everything changed. Now we've got, again, decentralized autonomous organizations popping up. We've got a multitude of cryptocurrencies. All this was afforded to by the technology that really stopped the double spending. And this was a series of computers plugged in together to create a peer-to-peer network that really came together on the consensus about the truth. And sometimes it's really hard to kind of, just, I guess, articulate how important that can be, because ultimately, blockchain technology, you could say, is a boring network protocol. So here are some of the examples of some people that have framed it quite eloquently, and again, and they I think translate the power of it. So Adam Krellstein from Symbiont actually says it's, in its most simple form, a blockchain is a database of everything that's ever happened, that everyone has a copy of, but no one controls. It uses various consensus mechanisms to ensure that everybody has the same version of the truth. And by design, it makes it extremely difficult for anyone to alter that version of the truth. So that's one of the common, definitions that we kind of take away from blockchain technology. But I really like Natalie's version. Blockchains are a new shared memory system for society. Different blockchains have different memories or different properties. It's the master truth record. If you control the ledger, you control society. It's why decentralization gives power back. And I think that a new shared memory system is a really powerful way to think of what a public blockchain presents for society. And Gavin Wood, who was the co-founder of Ethereum and now the founder of Polkadot, blockchains take the risk and uncertainty out of a process by applying a set of rules. And again, these can be applied to various aspects of blockchain governance. And so the more rule sets there are around this technology, the more it can be autonomous. And that's where even smart contracts come into play. So again, is it just a boring database protocol, or is it something more powerful? And we're just seeing the start of that. And so how will this newfound power, this newfound database affect the legal industry? We're really heading into a new era. So if you look at on the right side, we're now leaving the digital age, having come from the analog age. So when we were in the analog age, we essentially just took what was offline and put it online. But now with this newfound backbone of decentralized networks, of blockchains, of AI, decentralized technologies and private and public key cryptography, we're really heading into a new era, because it's a confluence of these technologies that allow us to have this computational era now. And that's quite powerful. So again, things like smart contracts, just blockchain and AI are really having a big influence over where the legal industry is going. So if we just do a quick overview of some of the little areas of focus in the legal industry that the blockchain is really impacting on a really major way. And it's, again, if you take the Gartner hype cycle, and put that aside for a moment and just realize how many people out there are actually building really amazing technology, I think you're going to see an exponential curve of adoption. So we're, again, in the early phases of that. So taking that digital scarcity that blockchain afforded us, we can now have identity, which I'll explore later in some of the ways that legal is approaching this. But everyone can have this unique DNA through public and private key cryptography that allows us to have a private key that becomes our identity online. So the internet was created for machines to talk to each other, but really having humans trust each other, we really need to give ourselves a label. And so blockchain is helping us do that by giving us, again, this unique DNA. Now that we have that, we can actually sign electronic signatures and do it in a digital fashion, again, with a unique identity, and have a final version of that document that's quite unique. So you can imagine in a very short period of time, all legal documents being done in a digital format, but being on the blockchain to ensure that, again, there is only one source of truth and one digital representation of that document. Trust accounting in its very name. So trust can now be distributed across a smart contract, and funds can be put into escrow. So there's different mechanisms for actually handling trust accounting and funds, which can be handled in an autonomous fashion without one central authority being in charge of those funds. And as we showed at the start of the history of ledgers, the Mesopotamian clay tablet looks a lot like the contracts of today. So maybe for the first time in 4,000 or 5,000 years, contracts are really going through the first evolution. So smart contracts are really going to change the way lawyers, as their main commodity, really do business, interact, and actually oversee these types of agreements between parties. And again, taking that same type of technology, taking smart contracts, you can now automate dispute resolution. And so there's a lot of alternative dispute resolution arising where smart contracts can help parties resolve disputes, where value can actually be stored similar to trust accounting in escrow until there's a resolution to that dispute to then be distributed when parties agree on it. Evidence, you're seeing courts and audit trails of evidence being hashed to a blockchain so that there is, again, immutable evidence that something has been submitted, that something is a form of evidence for a trial, and that it can't be tampered with. And that's really evolving quite quickly. You're seeing public records. So whether it's court records, whether it's public databases, whether it's health records, whether it's land titles for property, they're all starting to move online. But importantly, they're moving onto a blockchain. So again, there is immutable history of those documents and one source of truth. And it's not sitting on one centralized server. And services, and this is kind of the area that I'd really like to kind of touch on today, where legal services is one aspect of how our relationships are changing in the transaction process thanks to blockchain. Going back to, again, the history of trust, we looked at peer-to-peer relationships when we had kinship and tribes. Well, we're kind of moving back into that era because blockchain as a trust layer is actually allowing us to kind of interact on a peer-to-peer level once again. And some of the examples that are actually live right now. So there's a platform by AXA, the insurance company, that lets people take out travel insurance, and it's built on the Ethereum blockchain. So once a party takes out a travel insurance policy, they are then able to actually claim that insurance policy in the event that the policy triggers instantly. And so what that means is that you're removing a whole claims department, you're moving away from the customer support that's required, and it's really becoming quite instantaneous. So this insurance policy is basically for delayed flights. When the party takes it up, once their flight's known to be delayed, that's automatically triggered from a database that's feeding in as an oracle to an Ethereum smart contract. And essentially, the company can then pay out that insurance policy to the owner of that policy instantly. So ultimately, all this is doing is really just driving down transaction costs. And again, we're going into more of an autonomous peer-to-peer fashion of actually interacting with the companies. And so what's also changing is intermediaries. The same way blockchain technology allowed a cryptocurrency that allowed peer-to-peer transactions without a bank, allowed you to store value, it allowed someone to actually exchange value. but without an intermediary, we can now apply that same philosophy, that same technology underpinning to marketplaces, to service industry, and actually connect people peer-to-peer. So this is an example. In the US, you might have platforms like TaskRabbit, where essentially value leaves the platform in the shape of 20 to 30% that goes to shareholders. Well, now with smart contracts, you can actually provide things like escrow, digital identity that allow people to trust each other a lot more and actually transmit funds directly to each other. So you don't have to have that 20 to 30% leaving the relationship. And again, these are platforms that are live now, built with blockchain. So you can see that service industry is really taking a really big shift in how we connect people online. Another example is Uber. Uber in Austin, Texas, along with Lyft, had an issue with the city ordinance that forced them out of town. And very quickly, another platform popped up, but this time in a peer-to-peer fashion, where drivers were more autonomous. They were actually able to set their prices based on an algorithm, and then were able to connect with the passenger in a peer-to-peer fashion, paying each other directly. And so again, this is another example of how we're moving into peer-to-peer transactions and doing so online. So what if we could apply that same philosophy to legal services? What if we wanted to bring in more trust to our relationships online? What if we actually wanted to transact peer-to-peer, in a sense, to really drive down costs? Well, we can do that with blockchain. So this is exactly what Legaler is currently building right now. So we envision, again, that a technology company will become the largest provider of legal services. And in order to do that, in order to connect people in the most efficient manner possible, we want to connect them in a peer-to-peer fashion. And doing it with smart contracts allows new types of business models that weren't previously possible. It allows a new type of transparency. It allows a new type of trust. So essentially, there's 4 layers to the ecosystem that we're building and to this infrastructure. The Legaler DAO is essentially the organization that oversees this community. So going back to the previous example of 20 to 30% of a transaction generally going to an intermediary, what this allows is a very efficient company to be built on code that is very transparent, but doesn't have shareholders actually taking profit out of the middle. It has token holders that make up the community and are incentivized to actually perform tasks, to add value, and have their incentives aligned. So the Legaler DAO is actually the organization that will oversee this entire community. It'll also handle blockchain governance. And so the blockchain, think of it as the Ethereum for law, is a public blockchain that's designed as a blockchain for the legal industry. And I'll share more on that in a moment. On top of this blockchain, we have a far more scalable blockchain that can actually allow decentralized applications to be built on top of it. And that's where the Legaler platform comes in. And the Legaler platform essentially is a series of building blocks that allow you to build decentralized applications. And I'll share more on that right now. So why build another blockchain? And we already have Bitcoin, we have Ethereum. Well, right now, Ethereum is traveling at about 15 transactions per second. MasterCard and companies that are often quoted as benchmarks generally have transactions in the thousands, around 40 to 30,000. So right now, the current blockchains are quite slow. And this is because all the nodes in the network, Ethereum currently has just over 12,000. Every node in the network has to maintain every transaction and keep record of every transaction at the same time to come to a consensus about the truth. And this is just very slow right now. And so Bitcoin, it has proof of work, and that's very slow and expensive. And it has over 20,000 nodes. So right now, to build scalable dApps, it's not really so efficient. And the other thing is the cost. So competing with someone that's sending $1 million transaction with all the other transactions on a blockchain just to run a legal dApp also gets quite expensive and is quite slow. So you end up paying lots of gas fees. So what Legaler is doing is creating an infrastructure that's specifically designed to actually run scalable applications for the legal industry. And we're doing this through a delegated proof of stake model. So it's a public blockchain, so it's fully decentralized. Anyone can actually join and become a node. but it's also secure because it's using Ethereum as a backbone through a smart contract framework called Plasma. What this means is that Legaler's blockchain can travel at a far higher speed in the thousands and potentially scale to the millions of transactions, while it has economic security out of Ethereum's blockchain because tokens and value can actually be secured on the mainnet of Ethereum. And Ethereum holds over $100 billion of value. So we're backed by a very, very large infrastructure of value and trust in the Ethereum blockchain. Now, this is all quite new infrastructure. So for the legal industry, we're responsible for building this early infrastructure. And to build a new type of application requires new types of technology. And again, think of it like it's Apple and you need to have an app store. What do you need? You need the tools, you need the ecosystem, you need the app store. So Legal is providing all these different building blocks that developers and businesses can use to create these new types of business models and marketplaces that don't rely on intermediaries. Again, you can place funds into a smart contract, perform the job for a client, and the client can then release those funds. You can have a digital identity and sign into a platform and be verified instantly. You can have a dispute and solve that through smart contracts autonomously. And so this ecosystem is fueled by a token. So again, to get rid of the traditional structure and hierarchy of shareholders and keep value within the network, we require a token. So the token's real utility at a base level is to provide incentive for others to basically provide computation and security to the network. So validators in the legal blockchain earn a token for validating blocks similar to a miner in the Bitcoin blockchain. And again, the token will have different use cases going forward that allow this community to run as an autonomous organization that's quite automated. And so what do we need to build these new types of applications? So where we're starting is obviously with accounts and identity. And this has far-reaching implications for all different types of applications across the legal industry. So what we're trying to do is actually bring provenance to the entire life cycle of a lawyer, legal professionals, and clients. And I'll get to some of the benefits of that shortly, but imagine that you went to Stanford Law School. Stanford is really the only party that can actually verify that. So what if they were able to verify that on a blockchain where you have immutable evidence of your certification that's been hashed to a blockchain? If you held that in your wallet, you would then be able to show the world, hey, I went to this university and this is my degree, and there'd be immutable evidence. Going back to digital scarcity, well, now there's one copy of that university degree that can't be destroyed. You own that. It's in your wallet. You could then use that and potentially in the future receive a practicing certificate from a bar association. So imagine you held all those in your wallet. You could now sign into an application and it's decentralized and there's no verifying party in the app, but you're entering as a verified party because you have all these attestations from third parties. And what that does, it gives us lots of different benefits. So if we look at the benefits of self-sovereign identity, what it's really moving away from is centralized stores of identity. So people have lost trust in Facebook, in Google, in all these different companies, in the Equifax hack, basically all these different companies losing all that data. Well, what if we were able to own that data? And that's essentially what self-sovereign identity allows us. By having identity on the blockchain and personally owning the public and private keys, we're able to kind of have full control over that identity. And so what that, you can analogize that similar to maybe a mailbox. So you have someone that has your public address and they know where you are. They can put something into your mailbox. They can send you something like an email. But on the other side, you've got the private key. You've got the actual key that unlocks that to take the data out of it. So public and private key cryptography works quite similar. And that's also how people send cryptocurrencies to each other. You can have my public address, but I own that private key. So by owning that private key, I don't then need passwords. So I can sign into platforms with a single sign-on. It acts as a two-factor authentication. I can then actually have all my claims verified by many different people and have it in one place, as opposed to, say, a Google just owning my identity and then sharing that with others. So my internet identity is strewn all across the different platforms. By having one identity, I can actually sign into platforms instantly and choose which information to share, because that information is stored in my own device, in a centralized store on my iPhone or my personal device, where I can then choose to share that with the public. So it's really giving people control back of that identity. And as touched on earlier with digital signatures, once you have that unique DNA, once you have that unique identity, you can actually sign transactions, you can actually sign documents, and people can actually attest and verify you on a blockchain. And so once you have that profile, you are able to have an identity within our ecosystem. So lawyer profiles are something that we're creating, and again, as the first means to give people this newfound identity online. And integrating all the different legal tools into that, you're able to kind of service clients virtually in your browser using the video communication tools, booking tools. And really, this is the start of bringing legal services online and underpinned by blockchain. So again, taking those different tools that we're putting onto the table and going back to what we're trying to provide to the broader ecosystem, we're making these open source and again, providing the building blocks for others to come and build, use their imagination and build new types of applications. So digital signatures, again, is just one of those underpinnings. So why are these so important, and why is it so fascinating to kind of create this new type when you have HelloSign and DocuSign already? Well, what if we're able to have digital signatures that weren't stored on one server? What if we could actually have private keys and let only people that have those keys, like a multi-signature wallet, to access that document? Again, one version of this document exists. We know it's a single source of truth, and people can now sign that with their unique private key. So we know who signed it, we know it's unique, and that's timestamped to a blockchain. So there's one final version. What that does is we're able to actually create an alphanumerical hash of that document and place that on the blockchain, not the actual document itself, but actually place an alphanumerical hash that can be referenced. If that hash doesn't match, we know the document has actually changed. So again, going back to why blockchain technology can allow these new possibilities, we can have one final version of this document that's been signed by verified parties, timestamped onto a blockchain. If in the future there's a dispute, we can refer to that single source of truth. There's not multiple document versions flying around, and it's really easy to verify. So again, this will be a huge breakthrough, and looking at the impact on the legal industry, once we have smart contracts, then we'll really want to have, I guess, an audit trail of the life cycle of that contract. And then once it's executed onto a blockchain, we can really verify things quite easily. And so taking all of those building blocks, we're able to now provide new ways of giving legal advice. So what if there was an Uber for law, but the lawyers and clients were interacting directly? What if we could fractionalize legal questions and a lawyer could answer one question and be rewarded in tokens for fractional legal advice? What if you could actually create a referral network where lawyers can actually share referrals but without splitting fees, and doing that through loyalty points and tokens? What if you create a recruitment network that again removes the recruiter from the middle and actually connects peer-to-peer transactions? So again, all these new types of models are possible, but essentially all they're doing is driving costs down and making things cheaper and more accessible for people. And so that was really one of the driving inspirations behind how we developed this blockchain technology. It was really about access to justice. So if you look at the United Nations figures, you've got about 4 billion people that live outside of access to justice and the rule of law. And the recent figures that came out from The Hague are more around the 6 billion number. So essentially a $1 trillion industry has this huge latent market that's being underserved. In the US and developed countries, Australia, UK, US, Canada, we have a really systemic problem because 80% of people, and this is according to the American Bar Association, 80% of people that have a legal issue are unable to get legal help. And that means they're unable to access the system because it's too difficult, too expensive. So what can we do to change this? And this is where really our blockchain journey started at Legaler. We were inspired by one of the law firms using our communication tool, Salvo's Legal, which is the Salvation Army's law firm that essentially was one of the first social enterprise law firms in the world. What this did was they set up one arm that was for-profit, another arm that was a non-for-profit, and this created this new type of business model where all the profit from the commercial pursuits of the law firm went next door to the non-for-profit to help someone who walked in off the street and passed the means and merits test. Now, this law firm raised over $60 million in the first 5 years, which was, again, a small law firm in Australia that created this model. And what we saw was, well, if one law firm could have such an impact, what if we could have a scalable model that actually did this? And we realized where things were scalable and where things weren't scalable. We realized that we'd need a legal office in every city, vetting people. But then we had this realization that there was people already doing that. Community legal centers were already doing that. And so essentially we said, well, what if we could work with community legal centers because they're already acting as a clearinghouse, but they're just under-resourced and under-staffed by pro bono lawyers. So that's where we kind of came up with Legaler Aid. And Legaler Aid is the world's first decentralized legal charity. And it has a couple of aspects to it. One is a crowdfunding element. So basically allowing community legal centers to vet clients, disadvantaged clients and their cases. We're then able to put those cases into a marketplace where law firms can tender for the work. And so it's paid work, but when we find a milestone, an actual target for what that work will cost, we're able to create a public Kickstarter page. But again, built on the blockchain, we can actually have full traceability, accountability of where the funds go. So this really changes the mindset around charities. If we can make everything transparent, Legaler Aid's costs, where the funds have gone, directly transfer that value to the parties doing the work instead of taking a cut out of the middle, we're really able to create a new paradigm. And we call this a proof of impact ecosystem. So we're able to trace the impact of every participant. So a donor is able to see where all their funds go, the impact they've made. You're able to see the impact on a client's life and the outcome of the case. You can see the impact the lawyer and the community legal center has had. And you can also see Legaler Aid's impact over time, measuring how many cases are rendered, how many funds are raised. So the other aspect of Legaler Aid is basically the second phase, where we match pro bono lawyers to disadvantaged clients. And we do this through creating a platform that acts, again, as a little bit of an Uber, where it's a matchmaking service. So it's inviting more and more people to actually enter the pro bono market. If it was easier for lawyers to actually just open up the computer, say, I am an IP lawyer in Sydney and I care about creatives. Well, what if an algorithm knew my interests, knew what I cared about, knew I was available, and could match me with someone that's disadvantaged? Well, there'll be a lot more people incentivized to actually participate. But the other thing is we can further incentivize them, because blockchain is a great incentive machine. So we can further incentivize lawyers to participate by providing somewhat of a frequent flyers rewards points through tokens. And that's where Legaler rewards come in. So essentially, we're trying to incentivize and bring awareness to pro bono cases and use technology to better connect those parties together. And so that's really a new paradigm in access to justice. It's a new paradigm in online legal services. And bringing together people in this peer-to-peer fashion, we believe that we can actually really improve that 4 billion or 6 billion number by making legal services more effective, more accessible, and cheaper. If you have any ideas about how to create new business models, if you have any ideas in terms of letting your imagination run wild with a future of legal services, please get in touch. We're in the early stages of building this technology. In January 2019, Legaler Aid will be launching to the public in beta. Legaler ID will be ready in the next couple of weeks, and so they'll be ready for launch of Legaler Aid. And then we also have our blockchain, which will be a testnet will be live by the end of January. So please get in touch I'll put my details up again, but if you want to explore these different possibilities, please do get in touch. And if you're a lawyer and you're interested, legal professional interested in blockchain, we also have Blockchain for Law, which the URL is blockchainfor.law. And we have a global network of lawyers that are interested in the intersection of blockchain and the law, essentially discussing regulation, things like smart contracts, development. And this community is really engaged and really growing quite fast. So it's the best way to actually keep abreast of what's happening and also contribute. Thank you again for letting me share some of what Legal is working on, and hopefully it's been enlightening. But again, my contact details are on there to get in touch, and I'll just see if there's any Q&A questions for anyone to answer. So I've got one. Kim, do you want me to just quickly answer this one here on the screen?
Sure, that'd be great.
So maybe it was quite early on in the piece, but Raquel had asked, can you elaborate on the term technology? I would not think of referring to family or religion as a trust technology. Okay, so technology is basically a structure or a process that we can use to kind of to repeat something and to bring a process to it. So basically, trust used in the form of, say, religion or family really gave us a framework or a set of rules that we were able to use to then engage with each other. And humans are quite, I guess, pulled away from other species by actually being able to create things like fiction, to create things like language that actually allowed us to collaborate together. And so religion, family, these are all kind of trust technologies that allowed us to collaborate. So yes, they're not plugged into a wall, they're not run on electronics, but they're different frameworks that allow us to actually bring rules and frameworks to kind of what we're doing that essentially bring efficiencies at the end of the day. Hopefully that helped answer that question.
Thank you, Stevie, and I'd like to thank everybody who joined us today. This has been recorded and will be posted on legalconsortium.org. If you're interested in seeing previously recorded sessions or looking at what we have scheduled in the future, please visit that website. Thank you.